Time to get serious about football, and the talking season is almost over, and Ohio State ready to hit Big Ten Media Days and then on into fall camp and a lot of decisions to be made. We got Pat Murphy here from Bucknuts 247 Sports, and Pat and I have gotten together a number of times here in the last several years prior to fall camp, and we've leaned on Pat to break down the Buckeyes position by position. Pat, what's going on today?
Not much. It's been a minute since we've talked, but this offseason seems to go by faster and faster every year. So I'm excited. We're almost to football season.
It is just about here, and Ohio State. It's strange for me that every time I turn around and see another prognostication, there seems to be somewhat of a split over this team, despite all the talent, has more question marks than they typically do, or maybe have in quite some time, versus a lot of people are out there saying, hey, there's just so much talent, they'll overcome it, and this is a serious national championship contender.
Well, I think there's two things. First, everyone knows Ohio State's predicament when it's come to the biggest games, right? And that included the two losses to Michigan the last two seasons, and then obviously the college football playoff against Georgia. So I think those things stick out in people's minds. I also think you're, unlike last year, you're breaking in a new quarterback. And for some reason, and I'm still trying to figure out why this is, and I've talked about this a little bit throughout the offseason, there seems to be some doubt about Ohio State's quarterbacks. Kyle McCord was a 5-star prospect coming out of high school. He helped get Marvin Harrison. Now, Marvin Harrison, obviously very talented on his own, but those were the tandem that won state championships in Philadelphia, competed a national schedule. To me, the fact that he's being doubted is strange. Maybe not so much Devin Brown, who hasn't played as much and wasn't quite ranked as high coming out of high school. But the real thing to me is until Ryan Day, and I want to throw Corey Dennis's name in there, fail to hit on a quarterback or develop a quarterback or recruit a quarterback, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. And, I think you look around college football at some of these programs. I think we did the same with Clemson for a period of time. They obviously missed with DJ Ungungule. Did I say that right? We do it with Lincoln Riley.
That's okay.
Yes, with the quarterbacks that he's produced. So I'm confused why there seems to be the questions about at least Ohio State's offense. I fully understand the questions about Ohio State's defense, given the last two times you saw the Buckeyes go out and play. The defense was exposed after appearing to take some pretty big steps throughout the course of the regular season. So for me, the questions aren't any different than last year when people were projecting the Buckeyes to go to the college football playoff and be one of the teams contending for a national championship at this time a year ago. Other than the fact that the quarterback is not experienced, but we saw C.J. Stroud 2 years ago be a Heisman Trophy finalist in his first year as a starting quarterback. Justin Fields did the same thing 2 years before that. Dwayne Haskins the year before that. So, again, until it's proven that Ohio State misses on a quarterback, I'm not going to be worried about that part of the offense.
I'm right there with you. I do get the doubts and I get the questions. I understand them when a quarterback has not had the opportunity to go out there and prove themselves. Sure, there is still a question mark, but the track record is so lengthy under Ryan Day in particular. And then even if you extended past that, you have to go back to the year 2000. You have to go back to Steve Belisari to find an Ohio State quarterback who was not playing for championships and winning championships in the Big Ten or otherwise. All of them. C.J. Stroud, I know, didn't win the Big Ten, but he was playing in a college football playoff game. He was playing for a championship. Every Ohio State quarterback has played for championships forever. Maybe Kyle McCord doesn't have a certain flair or flash or something that people are looking for. I don't know what it is. The other thing that tips the hand for me is that with everything that's at stake and with what's expected of this program every year, with guys like Sam Hartman and Devin Leary and all sorts of capable, talented, experienced quarterbacks flying around to various locations around college football, I would have thought that Ohio State would have made a push in the transfer portal if they did not believe that Kyle McCord and or Devin Brown could get the job done.
Absolutely. And again, I just go back to these are really talented kids. And maybe it would be different if they'd come out of spring practice and said Kyle McCord's the guy or Devin Brown's the guy, or at least that one of them had shown enough to kind of take a lead. Maybe it would be different if Kyle McCord had just looked awesome in the spring game or in the, when he's played, though his only real playing time was as a true freshman when he started for an injured CJ Stroud and had a pretty good game against a non-Power 5 team, to be fair. To me, if you can't look beyond that, then I guess there's reason to doubt these guys. But I saw them in spring. A lot of other people saw them in spring. While it wasn't always perfect, they were pretty good, both quarterbacks. And I think if you were to look back at the spring before Justin Fields became the starter, the spring before CJ Stroud became the starter. Now, in CJ Stroud's case, there was still some COVID stuff going on, so we weren't around nearly as much. But, and I know this has been brought up quite a bit, Justin Fields had a really bad spring game, really bad. He completed, I think, 4 passes, barely hit 100 yards because he threw a deep pass late in the game or on his last throw of the game. And, he had his struggles too. CJ Stroud, we weren't there to report on it because of how everything was going, but it didn't all go perfect for him. This is the time of year that is the time of year when guys are really stepping into a different role for the first time as potential starters. And so there's a lot more on their plate, and they don't have to be ready to start a football game in the spring. And I think the Buckeyes are confident that either of these guys could step on the field in week 1 when the Buckeyes travel to Indiana and take care of business because of the talent. Now, you're still got to work some things out in fall camp, no doubt about that. But I just have no doubt in my mind that they can at least play at a Big Ten level. Now, can they go further than that and get the Buckeyes back to where they want to be? That's obviously going to be answered throughout the course of the season. But I'll just keep repeating it. Until it doesn't happen, until Ryan Day, the reason Ohio State isn't successful is because of a quarterback. I'm just going to continue to believe that Ryan Day and Corey Dennis will get it right.
Well, at some point in all of this, the competition is going to be so good, whether that be Michigan, Penn State, or a college football playoff, that yes, the throws won't always be wide open and all that sort of thing. But when you look at this wide receiver room and the 2 guys at the top of the board, especially, and I made the point this summer in a video that Julian Fleming might be the number 1 wide receiver in the Big Ten at any other school. That might be the number 1 guy. He just won't statistically be able to achieve that to show it. Most likely, who knows? Maybe he catches 70 balls this year, but this wide receiver room will make it so much easier for any quarterback, whoever wins this job, to throw to guys who are going to be just that much more wide open, or even if they're not that much more wide open, give you the faith and confidence that I'm still going to throw it at that number 18 guy, and he's going to pluck it away from somebody or from 2 guys. That's a good thing to lean on if you're Kyle McCord.
For sure. And it's funny. We heard this about Justin Fields and we heard this about CJ Stroud when they were heading to the NFL draft. Oh, well, they had such great weapons around them, right? That was the talk was, okay, how good will they be in the NFL when maybe the weapons aren't as good? Well, this may be the best group of weapons Ohio State has had. So shouldn't that then raise the level of the quarterback? Let's transition to wide receiver. We've talked enough about quarterback. I just think that that's part of the conversation that's getting left out. But yeah, I mean, you touched on it. Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka. Look, if Emeka Egbuka doesn't suffer what was a minor injury, but I believe it was to his shoulder or something along those lines last year, his numbers weren't that far off from Marvin Harrison Jr.'s last season. He could have been the one that we're talking about if he's fully healthy throughout the course of the year. Now I know, Marvin had some ridiculous plays. Maybe Emeka didn't have those, but easily 2 of the top 4 or 5 wide receivers in the country. And then you mentioned a guy like Julian Fleming. I just wrote about him kind of to your point last week that, look, this is a guy that was the top ranked receiver in his class, and he wasn't even in an offense that threw the ball very much. So there were clearly things that recruiting experts and people at Ohio State and other programs that recruited him liked, despite the fact that he wasn't catching the balls as frequently as a lot of guys around the country. And it's these physical traits that he has. He's a big-bodied wide receiver. He's got plenty of speed. He had to kind of learn the route running system and everything that Ohio State runs, and he also had to battle injuries. And this is a big if because it hasn't happened yet, if Julian Fleming is healthy, I think those are the trio of those groups. I don't think any other room in college football has that type of depth. And then you want to go further than that, a guy like Jaden Ballard, who is a deep threat guy, kind of like a Devin Smith was at Ohio State. He could be in the mix. They've got a few of the sophomore guys, Kojo Antwi, Keon Grays, that are going to look for time. Then they just brought in a freshman class with 4 wide receivers, 3 of which were ranked in the top 10 in our recruiting rankings, and another one who Bryson Rogers, that Ohio State believes is really underrated, that I don't even know if those guys are going to see the field this year, even though, as you said, at other schools, they may be in the mix pretty quickly. So if you are Ohio State and you're worried about the weapons, or you're worried about the quarterback, I think the weapons alone give you reason to be calm, because all you got to do is just get the ball into those hands. Just don't make the mistake. These guys are so good, or they have been so good, that I don't think you have a major concern. And then from a defensive side, how do you cover so many different guys? I think the only time we've seen Ohio State really struggle in that department was in the fourth quarter against Georgia, and that was without Marvin Harrison Jr. and Cade Stover, who I will get to. So you're kind of limited in your go-to pass options, but it's going to be tough for me to find a defense that can contain each one of these guys, assuming everybody stays healthy and whatnot.
And we'll get there right now, because for most teams across the country, it appears as though the trend is that the tight end is almost just kind of a slot receiver, just a big target for the quarterback to rely on. And they've become more and more separated from the offensive line, where they've been more extension of offensive line. Traditionally in football, you think tight end right there with the offensive line. Now it's more an extension of the wide receiver core, but they block a lot more. But Ohio State still uses tight end pretty much in a traditional way most of the time. And while they don't get too many targets or catches or flashy statistics, they seem to just churn out every time they have a starting tight end. He winds up making money in the NFL, and they apparently have, I think, 2 more with Cade Stover and G. Scott.
Yeah, I think you can throw Joe Royer in that mix. He's a guy who they were excited about heading into last season. He had some things happen with his family and some injuries, so he didn't get probably the amount of snaps that they would have liked him to have if everything had worked out. But you hit it on the head. Ohio State's hasn't been, because of the weapons they have at the other positions, hasn't been a school that force feeds a tight end, despite having guys who can certainly catch the ball. And Cade Stover, who was known more as a blocker, came to Ohio State as a defensive player, has actually played as linebacker in the Rose Bowl 2 years ago. Almost set the record. It goes back to Ricky Dudley, 20 however long ago that was. He had 36 catches, I want to say, last year. So certainly involved in, kind of the offensive game plan. But the thing with the Buckeyes is they want complete tight ends. And I think that's why, to your point, Mark, these guys do go on and have NFL careers, because they can do a little bit of everything. If you need them to catch some passes, they can. Maybe they're not prolific at it, but they can do that. They can block. So it's a solid developmental plan. And Keenan Bailey said earlier this offseason, I thought it was interesting, that when tight ends come in, unlike they asked them to do the same things that they asked Garrett Wilson to do in terms of getting open and catching passes, but they also asked him to do the same things as they asked Paris Johnson to do when he got here, and block on the offensive line. And that takes some time. So you've seen Ohio State develop these guys, Cade Stover being the most recent. And we'll see what the depth kind of looks like at that position. As I mentioned, Joe Royer, you mentioned G. Scott, the converted wide receiver. They also have Bennett Christian, Sam Hart, and the freshman Jelani Thurman, who everyone's really excited about, passes the look test, I would say. He was at the Buckeyes practice before the Peach Bowl, and you wouldn't have – this was while he was still a senior in high school – wouldn't have been able to tell that he was not just a guy standing on the sideline on the Ohio State roster watching practice. He just physically is that gifted. is much more of the receiving tight end, so he'll have to work on the blocking side of his game. But a guy that I could see as the year progresses, maybe working his way into a role, especially if there are injuries at maybe any of the receiver positions or even at tight end, if they need somebody who can go out there and make some plays, because freakishly athletic does not do service to what Jelani Thurman is.
Got Pat Murphy here to break down the Buckeyes headed to fall camp. Pat joins us on a regular basis, but you can join him each and every day on bucknuts.com 247 sports. The running backs, and we've talked about this a number of times, but here we are at the dawn of fall camp. To me, there's not much concern. You want to utilize these guys the right way. You want to have the best guys on the field, all of that. So there are still crucial decisions to be made, important decisions, but I'm not concerned about this running back room. I'm just more fascinated as to see how it all plays out, because there's just so many guys in the room, so loaded. Michigan boasts the top tandem in the conference, but I got to think this is the best running back room, maybe 1 through 5 or 6 in the nation.
Certainly depth-wise, we're going to need to see these guys stay healthy, because that's kind of what's led to this depth. Is last year, both Mayan Williams and TreVeyon Henderson dealt with injuries. By the time you got to the end of the season and the Michigan game and the college football playoff, you're down to Dallin Hayden as basically your starting running back, a freshman who, let's be honest, most people didn't think would play a lot last season, and he ends up carrying the ball over 100 times and doing a good job. You also have Evan Pryor, who was supposed to be a part of this offense, tore his ACL in fall camp, so he missed the entire season. Chip Trayanum, who came to Ohio State, transferred to Ohio State to play linebacker after playing running back at Arizona State prior, and he then moved over to add some depth to the offensive side. He's going to stay on that side. So similarly to the receivers, I think you have 4 or 5 guys there who at other programs would start, no questions asked. The problem with, it's a good problem, I guess, to have for Tony Alford, and kind of the questions he will have to answer is, how do you use these guys? There do seem to be some kind of roles. Mayan Williams can be kind of your power back. TreVeyon Henderson can do a little mix of everything. Evan Pryor's more of the receiving back, but these guys are all going to want touches, right? That's how it works with running backs. And Ohio State's dealt with 2, maybe 3 running backs before, but when you get to 4 and 5, I start to wonder how best to get these guys on the field. And frankly, in the big games, I don't know if you can keep everybody happy. Now, when you're playing some of these non-conference games, maybe some of their easier, so to speak, Big Ten opponents, you can, rotate guys through and pull guys out of the game early. But in my mind, Mayan Williams and TreVeyon Henderson, those are your co-starters. And then you kind of figure out where everyone else fits in from there. And when you need to run the ball, when you need to get yards, one of those 2 is probably going to be on the field. Now, I really did like what we saw from Dallin Hayden last season. I think he can do some things for this Buckeye team this year, and then probably take over the position more so in 2024. I'll be interested to see what Evan Pryor's role is once he's fully healthy. He did not take part in spring practice. He recovered from that knee injury. We heard a lot of good things. We just haven't seen a ton. But certainly much more of a receiving back as he continues to develop the other parts of his game. And then Chip Trayanum, speedster, absolutely can fly. How do you fit that in is another question. So, again, like I said, a good problem to have for Ohio State when you have so many talented running backs.
And I think people miss that on Trayanum because, and I as well, at the point that he moved into the program and moved from linebacker to running back to linebacker, back and forth and so forth, is that he is that fast. I think because he transitioned from linebacker, the thought is, well, okay, he's a different type of back. We got Pat Murphy here, Bucknuts 247 Sports, breaking down the Buckeyes headed to fall camp. Please like the video. It's easy to do. Just hit the like button and subscribe here at the Voice of College Football. And again, check out Pat's work at bucknuts.com. Well, the offensive line, those are the guys that make it all work. So these guys are fun to watch on the outside in space, but the offensive line has the question marks of, at this point last year and throughout the season, the strength was those 2 soon to be NFL tackles. Now we move inside with the guards being the established guys and possible question marks at the tackle position, and Luke Whippler, of course, moving on from center.
Yeah, to me, this is the biggest question. As I mentioned, I'm not overly concerned about the quarterback position, but you've got to be able to protect, right? You've got to give this, whichever quarterback wins the job, time. You've got to open up holes for the running backs. Both Donovan Jackson and Matthew Jones, as you said, Mark, are guards. Now, Donovan Jones could play tackle. There was some talk about that early in spring. Offensive line coach Justin Fry kind of shot it down that Donovan was going to remain at guard. Then when we talked to him after spring, he seemed to be a bit more willing to discuss that. I don't know what that will mean. Ohio State came out of spring with those positions still up in the air, which if you're a Buckeye fan, probably not reassuring. On the left side, you have Josh Fryer, who, in my mind, from what we saw during spring practice, was pretty much unquestionably your starting left tackle. Now, maybe the Buckeyes wanted to continue this competition, see if anyone stepped up. I'll get to a guy they added in just a second. And then on the right side, you had Zen Mikowski and Tegra Shabola that were kind of splitting reps back and forth at the right tackle position. In the middle at center, Carson Hinsman to me seemed to be the guy, but again, just hadn't done enough to win the job to be named the starter. At left tackle now, or at either tackle position, you're adding in Josh Simmons, a transfer portal guy who came in after spring practice, came out from San Diego State, was a guy that Justin Fry recruited out of, when he was at UCLA, recruited out of high school. So familiarity there, a 4-star prospect. It'll be interesting to see where he kind of fits in. When we did talk to Justin Fry after spring, he wanted to wait until they got the chance to work with him on the field before they started pegging him as one tackle or the other. It wouldn't surprise me if he at least gets some reps at left tackle to see if he can beat out or win the job there, but a guy that could certainly be a part of the conversation. And then at center, you get Jacob James back, a guy who was hurt throughout spring. He's a senior, wasn't the most highly recruited guy, but has played a decent amount. And then Victor Cutler was the other player sort of contending with Carson Hinsman at that center spot, another transfer who came from Louisiana Monroe, a guy who I think probably is a year or so away from really contributing, but did play a number of different positions. So there are a number of options for the Buckeyes. It's just a matter of, determining what's your best option, and then we will have to figure out, is the best options good enough to be what Ohio State needs from an offensive line? I don't mean that in week 1 at Indiana. I mean that more like week 4 against Notre Dame, or down the road when you play Wisconsin and Penn State, or you head to Ann Arbor at the end of the season, when you need your offensive line to be at the level it's been in recent years. I think there are still some questions about if the players that are in the program right now have developed enough and are ready to kind of take that on. Fortunately, you don't start off the season like you did last year with one of those marquee games against Notre Dame. You're going to have some time to ease into that. But to me, like I said before, this is the biggest question for Ohio State's offense, is figuring out those 3 positions.